Good afternoon and welcome to News 24. This afternoon, I'm in conversation with the authors of the newly released book titled Enemy of the People. We'll get to hear who this enemy is from the authors that are joining me in studio is News 24 editor Adriaan Basson and Huffington Post editor Pieter du Toit. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
You've received a lot of flack just from the title of the book, and some of the criticism has said, this is Jacob Zuma, who was voted by the ANC's majority in 2007, 2012, and we came from an election in 2014 where more than 11 million people put their cross next to his name. How do you define him as enemy of the people, Pieter?
But let's say I think the story has a long wind-up. It's a long tale. It starts in 2007 when Jacob Zuma became the ANC's leader at Polokwane, and obviously it took us 10 years to see how this man would govern this country. And I think by any objective measure, President Jacob Zuma has, by his own actions and by his own deeds, has positioned himself as an enemy of the people. Not only enemy of the people, I'd argue enemy of the ANC. If you see what he's done to the ANC in 10 years, the ANC is certainly in a worse off state than it was in 2007. The ANC's the majority has been eroded by an enormous degree, and the country is in a poorer place. Now, just one example, the big issue the last year has been state capture. It's on every front page, it's on every front page of every website all the time, and there's a number of measures, and we argue in the book that the president, by his actions, the way that he's attained power, the way that he's used power, has painted himself into a corner, and that's why we argue he is the enemy of the people.
Irony of it is that Adriaan, when he came in, he was lauded as the man of the people, and now to be ending his tenure in the ANC as an enemy of the people, it's a big jump, eh?
Absolutely, and I mean, some of those people who were very loudly campaigning for Jacob Zuma in 2007 are now some of his biggest enemies. Julius Malema, Zweli Nzimavavi, Blade Nzimande recently fired from his cabinet. I'm sure these people will all have more nastier things to say about the president than we do. But just to add to what Pieter said, when President Zuma took the oath of office in 2009 after his election as president of the country, and again in 2014, he promised to serve the people of South Africa. He promised to uplift the people, to deliver services, to uphold the rule of law. And he's ruled against us in all those regards. If you look at his very poor record, track record of upholding the rule of law, of undermining government departments, of not consulting his own top six in the ANC when firing finance ministers, the effect that has had on the markets, the money South Africa has lost, and obviously chasing a nuclear deal which we just cannot afford, and which will bankrupt the generations of South Africans to come. So yes, he was a very popular man. He's a war man. He was definitely much more a man of the people than former President Thabo Mbeki, and that's definitely one of the reasons he did make it in Polokwane.
And then the subtitle of it is "The People Fighting Back," but then the argument is the man is still standing. I mean, I don't think we have ever seen as many people take to the streets of South Africa to protest for a man to go, the alliance partners calling on Zuma to go. Have we fought back and lost?
Look, I think it's quite remarkable that President Zuma has stayed in office as long as he had. If you just look at the past 24 months, 18 months, to see what he has survived. If we take the firing of Nhlanhla Nene, the judgment by the Constitutional Court in March last year, the results of the local government election in August, the outcome of Thuli Madonsela's state of capture report, everything that has happened since, the firing of Pravin Gordhan, he survived every single one of those cataclysms. And we're not even talking about all the dramas that happened before that. So yes, the president is still very much in power, but there's a reason for the president still being in power. But the remarkable thing about this country is the pushback. Now, yes, and there's a lot of, your argument does carry water. He's still in power. Have we fought back strongly enough? Look, I don't think he's done everything that he wanted to do. If he had his own way, the nuclear deal would have been finalized by now. So that's a measure of the fact that there's a lot of people in government, in the civil service, also in civil society, pushing back. But it's not easy to get a sitting president out of office when you don't have the political power. But there's definitely a strong pushback by South Africans across the board.
But the pushback also seems to be happening within the courts and not necessarily from all of these institutions that have been created to safeguard us against an individual stealing from the people, so to speak. These institutions that are supposed to be holding leaders like President Jacob Zuma accountable. Is that a weakness that we did not foresee, or does it just talk to, on paper, constitutionally, the institutions are good, but actually getting the job done, it's a whole different story?
Look, I think that, yeah, the fight back has also been in the court, and there's a whole chapter in this book that we dedicate to the 10 trials that has changed our history, where we believe that, you know, if it weren't for these people going to court, including the EFF and the DA and the UDM in the secret ballot case, you know, if it weren't for these cases, we would have had someone like Richard Mdluli now running the police, probably. We probably would have had the deal going through, or we'd have been at a much more advanced stage of the deal. The SASSA grants payment issue wouldn't have been resolved, Nkandla, etc., etc. So I do think, you know, civil society and opposition politics have matured in that level that they've used the courts. The courts have been very strong. The courts have survived this onslaught. And you will remember the criticism that lots of us had for Judge Mogoeng when he was appointed by Zuma.
Yeah, we all doubted him, yeah.
Yes, and just showed his mettle, just stuck to the constitution and the rule of law. I mean, the judgment in the Nkandla case will always stay with me. It was so scathing. So I do think the courts also played a big role in this. But also to a point where I agree with you, it's not ideal for the courts to almost govern. Because you don't want the constitutional court to have to say how grants must be paid. You know, somehow that's where the government must step in. But again, for me, that's collapse of government. A poor minister who's just there because of her support to Zuma.
I think the limits of our constitutional democracy has been tested over the last couple of years. We've now seen where the pressure points are. We've now seen what could happen, what can happen when there is collapse of institutions. We haven't had full-scale collapse of all our institutions. Some of our institutions are under pressure. If you look at SARS, if you look at the National Prosecuting Authority, if you look at the Public Protector all of a sudden, you know, it's all institutions that are under pressure.
And I mean, we'll go into details of some of the things you detail in the book, but obviously this is happening today when we are seeing the big men of Africa clearly falling. And I think it's something that we never thought we would see in our lifetime. I mean, President Robert Mugabe, I think, has been president for as long as all of us have actually been alive. I mean, it seems like it reached a certain point. What would that point be for South Africa, Adriaan?
Look, I think, you know, for me, and this is still very fresh, as you say, the story is unfolding as we speak. But for me, one of the big takeaways from Zimbabwe is the collapse of strong institutions and the importance of having checks and balances in your legislature, but also in your institutions of democracy and of the constitution. In our case, and this is a drum I'm always beating, but I won't stop, is the criminal justice system. You know, ultimately, criminals should be behind bars. They should be investigated, arrested, prosecuted, and put into prison. I'm not only talking violent criminals, I'm talking white-collar criminals as well, people who loot the state. If that institution is not working and not functioning, as we argue in the book, we have a problem at the moment, you are open for corruption, you are open for elements of syndicates taking over your state. So that breakdown of institutions in Zimbabwe is something that we should be looking out for.
And, you know, one of the things that I pick up from the book is that literally you have ANC and then you have Zuma's ANC. You have cabinet, you have Zuma's cabinet, and never the two shall meet, because he seems to be operating outside of all of these, you know, bodies that are supposed to be countering or actually holding him accountable. Could you take us through like the modus operandi of Jacob Zuma and how we get here?
So I think if we cast our minds back to 2009, and Adriaan mentioned it in the beginning, when Jacob Zuma became president in 2009, people said, let's give him a chance. He was connecting with people on ground level. There was a new wave of openness, of glasnost and perestroika flowing through the ANC in the halls of parliament. Suddenly there was accountability being demanded from ministers, but that was the Mbeki government being held accountable by the new Zuma ANC. But that changed very quickly, and I think what we should realize now is that this man came into office with a very long plan ahead of him.
It was a strategy from...
I believe it was. I believe Jacob Zuma came into power in 2009 with one goal in mind, and that was obviously to stay out of jail and stay out of trouble and try to secure himself. And the only way that he could do that was by maneuvering people into certain key positions. If you look at the National Prosecuting Authority, look at Treasury now, look at the South African Revenue Service, look at the Hawks, look at the police. You know, it's all look at the Department of or State Security, Intelligence. It's all institutions very important to safeguard the president, and he maneuvered his men into those positions very early on. But I think also it speaks to the failure and the weaknesses of the ANC. They've been unable to rein in the president. They've been unable to control him or give direction with him or to him. And a good example is Nhlanhla Nene. Another good example is Pravin Gordhan. Yeah. What did the ANC do after that calamity? I mean, I think we forget how dramatic the firing of Nhlanhla Nene was.
Yeah, and you go into detail in that. I mean, maybe that's one form of pushback with business. The ANC actually managing to force Jacob Zuma to actually change the appointments, with Des van Rooyen being the, now we call him the weekend special.
Yes. But like I said, it was. But again, what happened after that? You know, they forced the president to turn around his decision on that dramatic, fateful Sunday afternoon to reverse his decision. But at that moment, what happened? You know, he just consolidated his power. You know, a year after, he was forced to accept Pravin Gordhan as Minister of Finance, but he was never happy with Pravin Gordhan, and he found a way to get rid of him.
I mean, you know, Adriaan, as you're talking, one thing a friend of mine usually says is that, why are we surprised? Because if you look at the Schabir Shaik trial, that was Zuma operating, and now he was a president, and it was a grand scale and lots more opportunities. Why did we not see this coming? Especially given that there were telltale signs from the Schabir Shaik trial.
Well, we did, Mkhlatsi. You and I were there. You were covering the trial for the SABC, and I was a young reporter on Beeld. And we were sitting there every day, and we heard all this testimony of how Jacob Zuma was, how he receives money from Schabir Shaik to fund his lifestyle, ever-growing family, and in return met with private business people, even from abroad, and pitched to them Schabir Shaik as their BE partner. That was the quid pro quo. The ANC knew this. People like Zweli Mkhize were sitting in that courtroom. They listened to this testimony, they heard it. But there was, at the time, there was this huge conspiracy against Jacob Zuma, that they believed that the Zuma, or the coalition of the wounded, as they were called, believed that it was Thabo Mbeki out to get him. And that decision has hurt us so much, because that led ultimately not only to the charges being dropped, but to the entire Scorpions unit being closed down. The only unit in our country's history that's proved their mettle to be able to weed out corruption, to investigate corruption, the bribery, prosecute them and jail them. And we have lost so much in that capacity, and that's something that's going to take us at least a decade to rebuild.
So let's talk about his kitchen cabinet. I mean, obviously I call them the kitchen cabinet because there are all of these different people at the different institutions of our government, different agencies. Who are the key people that you find have enabled the state capture, who have enabled the breakdown of law enforcement and the institutions being weakened?
Well, I think you can answer that question on two levels. Let's look at the ANC first. The ANC's top six was changed after 2012. Someone like Matthew Sposa left, Thandi Modise left, and was replaced. They were replaced by other office bearers. William Mkhize came in. I can't remember who else. Jesse Duarte came in. So they were the keepers of the ANC's leadership, and we have to look at them, because they all knew what this guy was. They all knew who this man was and what his history was. And they saw the damage that he not only wrought on the state. If you look at the ANC, he's done enormous damage to the ANC as well. Enormous damage to the ANC's credibility. Now, Gwede Mantashe, the Secretary General, is the COO of the ANC. He knows everything that goes on in the party. Nothing goes on without his knowledge and without the knowledge of his office on the 6th floor at Luthuli House. They were unable to contain him. They were unable to push him into a direction when they saw he was veering off course, but they never were able to do it. So on an ANC level, I think the top six are complicit in state capture as we see it today. Most recently, on a government and a state level, David Mahlobo has certainly emerged as the president's right-hand man, as his hatchet man. If you go onto the presidency's website and you just scroll through the Facebook page of the presidency's president's visits overseas and local visits over the last 6 months to 12 months, David Mahlobo is always there.
The chubby man always looking.
He's always one step behind or on the president's right or left. And you know, he occupied the intelligence structures. He was in part in charge of the intelligence structures. And we know Zuma is a guy that comes from an intelligence background. So I would argue Mahlobo has been he's been a very important role player and a strong man for the president.
I think also, Mkhlatsi, you know, to use the Jacques Pauw's phrase, the president's keepers has changed over years.
Okay.
And that's where I would differ. I think that, you know, from Jacques' analysis, I think there were different politicians over years that Zuma used and abused and spit out in the end. People like Nkosi Nathi Nhleko. I mean, just think about the role he played in trying to bury the Nkandla matter, for years, sitting there sweating, dripping off him as he explained the fire pool.
Telling us about the fire pool.
Yeah, explaining the fire pool, just for the president to go to the Constitutional Court 2-3 years later and admit that it was a swimming pool. I mean, this is extraordinary. And there's other people like that. Thulas Ngesi, another one, the former Minister of Public Works.
Tina
Jumat Peterson, who's now not even in cabinet anymore. Blyden money, we can continue.
One of the things I'm also finding is that he found this way of finding unknown people and plunking them from, obscurity and putting them in the center. I mean, Mahlobo we didn't know, Msebenzi Zwane we didn't know. And all of a sudden they became the most powerful people beyond even the Gwede Mantashes or the Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa.
I think the Msebenzi Zwane story is just for me the ultimate state capture story, because here you have an absolutely unknown teacher and local councillor who then became an MEC member in Ace Magashule's cabinet in the Free State, whose CV then gets emailed from a businessman in Vrede, where Zwane lives, to Tony Gupta. Tony Gupta takes that CV, emails it to Duduzane Zuma, and a month later, Jacob Zuma, Duduzane's father, appoints him as Minister of Mines. Another month later, he travels to Geneva in Switzerland and makes sure that Glencore sells the Optimum mine to the Guptas. So, these things are orchestrated. They were uncanny. They were, it's actually unbelievable how these things worked. Fakey Mentor's story of how she was flown up to Johannesburg to see Ajay Gupta. Jacob Zuma walked in there, offered her the position of the Minister of Public Works and asked her to drop SAA's route to India in favor of Jet Airways. This is state capture. These are real examples of stories. So yes, you're completely right. He takes his almost people without a big support base, and people who's got checkered past themselves, and then when it goes wrong, like with Anwar Ramat and Xolisi Ntasana, he kicks them out.
Somebody actually said something like, people like Anwar Ramat would actually go to Lutula House to complain, and they would be listened to. But somebody like Msebenzi Zwane is basically beholden to Jacob Zuma because his career was literally uplifted overnight.
Well, just to re-emphasize what Adriaan said, so if you pluck someone from obscurity without a proven support base, without a support base in KwaZulu-Natal, for example, and you confer on that person enormous powers like the Minister of Mineral Resources, he's only beholden to you. I mean, he can't threaten the president with a constituency or threaten the president with something else. So it's easy to hire and fire in that case then. But again, Mahlatse, it comes down to the ANC's inability to manage this president. Take the Kobisi Jonas incident last year. I mean, it was a massive story, like you well know. Yeah. I mean, the Sunday Times front page said how the Guptas shopped for a minister. What did Gwede Mantashe do with that information? What did he do with Fakey Mentor's information? What did he do with Themba Maseko's information? What did they do with the public protector's information? I remember very well Gwede Mantashe announcing with great fanfare, his office is now launching an investigation. People can come to his office and make representations to him. Nothing happened.
We focus a lot on Gwede Mantashe, but I mean, Cyril Ramaphosa, who's a presidential hopeful for the ANC, is a deputy in Zuma's cabinet. Are we saying that, he was just a man standing idle and he just didn't know what was happening?
No, I think Ramaphosa will be judged harshly by history for what he has not done since 2012. And of course, they will tell us one day when they're out of their jobs, these long stories of how they had harsh meetings behind closed doors. That doesn't help us, unfortunately. It doesn't help the public because nothing changes. So Ramaphosa came in 2012 because he wants to be president, I think. And that's the one thing he couldn't buy with all his money. And he just stayed in Zuma's slipstream really for 5 years. He's now at the point where he's willing to make a move, and that's why he's now more vocal, speaking out, for example, against the axing of Pravin Gordhan. But yes, what was he doing in those cabinet meetings? Why couldn't he get the NEC to recall Zuma when Derek Hanekom and others stood up and made a very big call for Zuma to be recalled? I understand and I have sympathy with the argument that the ANC doesn't want to be seen as just another poor state that has to recall president after president because of bad governance. But surely there must be a point. Surely there must be a cut-off point, a line where you draw a line in the sand to say, we are actually government.
Even now, I mean, he talks about state capture, but none of the presidential hopefuls are even able to mention Zuma's name. I mean, we just spoke to Zweli Mkhize, the TG of the ANC, and was unable to even say that he's disappointed by what Zuma has done to the party and the country in 10 years.
I said it earlier and I'll say it again, the impotence of the top 6 has been shown up again and again. And the most shining example for me was after Pravin Gordhan was fired. Now that was a calamity for this country. On the Friday morning, Gwede Mantashe spoke on 702. And he just did not have an answer for Xolani Gwala when he asked him, did you know about this? And he said, no, we did not know. We weren't consulted. The afternoon, Cyril Ramaphosa was in Bloemfontein and he said, we don't agree with this. And only the following day, Willem Kiese issued a statement. And then they were repudiated. You remember very well.
They had to say, we shouldn't have said it in public.
Exactly.
It's not an apology, but it's we shouldn't have done it in public. Yeah.
But where's that point? I mean, we all thought Gordhan's axing is the point. Gordhan's axing came and went. Where are we now?
So what does this say, gentlemen? I mean, we are going to the December elective conference. 2 attempts in the NEC of the ANC to recall President Jacob Zuma. We're supposed to have a new president, whether it's Cyril Ramaphosa, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. Could we see the recall of Zuma happening after December?
Look, there's a reason why right in the beginning of our book, we have a quote there by the Honorable Batabile Dlamini that says, we all have small Nyana skeletons and we can't afford to let them out. And I think there was great truth in what she said, and she did us all a great favor actually. Because we've all been speculating for a long time, why is the ANC letting Jacob Zuma get away with this? Why are they protecting? Why are people not willing to stand up? And it's probably because he knows where the metaphorical and maybe not so metaphorical bones are buried. I think Jacob Zuma has a lot of files on a lot of people.
Is that why he threatens with the inquiry, that so many of you will be exposed and you will regret it?
Absolutely, I think so. I think he uses that tactic. He's a spy, he's an intelligence operative, and he holds his files close to him. He's often said he will write a book one day and tell the truth, but he's threatening, he's never done that. Like he has never actually gone to court, besides asking for his court day. So look, going to December, I think we'll see President Zuma fighting till the bitter end to make sure that Dlamini Zuma emerges from the conference. There is definitely a strong opposition to that. There's people like Kiese and Ramaphosa and their supporters finding their backbone after all and opposing him. But if it's too late, we'll have to wait and see until December.
What I always find intriguing is that given the disastrous reign of Jacob Zuma, and following 2007, when they wanted to recall Thabo Mbeki, they all thought the only strong man to stand up against him would be Jacob Zuma. But now they can't rally behind an individual and say, we're putting all our efforts behind an individual so that we can stand against the power of Jacob Zuma clearly demonstrated.
Well, one thing that Jacob Zuma, of course, has done since 2007, he's been very adept in dividing and ruling, and that's what he's done in the alliance. If you look at the coalition of the wounded that swept him to power at Polokwane in 2007, it's shattered. There's nothing left. The SACP is a shadow of the shadow that it was, and COSATU has been all but destroyed. Everyone that supported him, the Youth League has been neutered. I mean, he's put in a lot of effort in the ANC Women's League, but the whole coalition has been split. So it's very difficult for a much divided ANC to coalesce around one candidate, and that's what we're seeing now.
Will the final fight back maybe be 2019?
I think the people of South Africa are not stupid, and they will not stand by and watch this happen. So you already saw in 2016 during the local government elections in Johannesburg, in Tshwane and in Nelson Mandela Bay, the opposition parties actually now ruling those municipalities. Big blow for the ANC, historic blow for the ANC, specifically losing Johannesburg and Pretoria. So I think, the trend has turned. I think people are ready to either put their crosses behind another party or not to vote, which ultimately hurts the ANC. And I do think if the ANC elects the wrong leaders in December and they don't, committedly and publicly turn the tide against state capture and corruption, they might well lose in 2019.
Just to get back to your question to Adriaan about the recall, the ANC have snookered themselves with the recall of Thabo Mbeki, because they remember that they recalled Thabo Mbeki on a judgment by Judge Chris Nicholson that was overturned in the appeals court. And if you compare what Thabo Mbeki was accused of back then, it's not as bad as everything that Jacob Zuma has done. So a lot of people in the ANC are saying, look, we were hurt very badly with the recall of Mbeki, but we can't do it again. Even though the reasons that you can offer to recall Zuma is so much worse.
But it shouldn't be that staying in political power should trump everything else.
Well, that's what happened with the ANC. I mean, they're in power for the sake of being in power. And that's the problem when you sit with a government and when you sit with politicians that are pursuing power for the sake of having power.
Anything else that shocked you in the research of this book before we finish off?
Look, I think, there's an amazing interview that Pieter did with Lungisa Fuzile, the former DG of Treasury, where he really tells behind the scenes what happened when first Nene and then Gordon was recalled. Also when they were called back from London after landing at Heathrow on that
accused of trying to oust a sitting president.
Yes, and that Treasury roadshow they were on, and how they then went back straight to Luthuli House, and now Gwede literally held his hands in his head in his hands, and told him he doesn't know how to explain this, and that Zuma's going to fire them based on an intelligence report. I mean, it's very interesting to have those kind of accounts on, from the horse's mouth. Also, Maglatsi, what we really tried to do with the book was to explain state capture, because I do believe it's something that South Africans must understand. And I think sometimes, as especially investigative journalists, there's so much facts and names that you sometimes don't explain the stories well enough. So we've really tried with specifically Transnet, Eskom and Denal to explain how state capture works, from that first CV of Zwane that's emailed to Tony Gupta to ultimately the deal of Optimum. So I think it's important for South Africans to understand how the concept of state capture works, and we applaud in the book the people who stood up against this.
Before I let you go, guys, do you explain how Hlaudi Motsoeneng ended up at the SABC? I don't think we've ever had such a madman leading one of the most important institutions in strengthening our democracy.
Yeah, and Adriaan wrote that chapter, and he's got a wonderful quote where Hlaudi says, "I'm Hlaudi Motsoeneng, baby." And it just illustrates to me the megalomania of people like that. Who, once they're in positions of power, it was used and abused at will. And what happened at the SABC is such a travesty. I mean, the SABC is such an important part of our social fabric, and if the SABC doesn't work, it makes our society so much poorer. So it's fantastic to see that there seems to be a degree of turnaround there. But I also want to add, if I can tell you what's shocking about the book and during the research was how much has actually happened in a decade and how much this guy survived. I mean, if you go back to Nkandla, and we've all, state capture is almost overshadowing everything. But Nkandla was such a disaster and such a scandal, actually, and he survived it. And it's quite remarkable to see everything that he's done and everything that he's survived, and that he's still in power, like you said earlier.
Does this also not talk to, how we've moved from one to another? The fatigue of South Africans, because at some point it get to how much worse can it get? Pravin Gordon talks about connecting the dots, and which is what the book basically does in terms of how it all started, where it was, where institutions were damaged, where money was stolen. Do you think there's a bit of fatigue from South Africans?
No, there is, and we try, as journalists to counter that with, the presentation of these stories. But, South Africans must be strong now. They mustn't get tired, because this is an important time in our history. This is a time when things are in flux, things can go the right way. Yes, we are fatigued, and it feels so overwhelming. But people like Thuli Madonsela has shown, and in the book, on the Nkandla chapter, we name a few people there. We name people like Mandy Rousseau, the late journalist. We name Thuli Madonsela for investigation. We name Julius Malema, who went to court. These are individuals who stood up and said, "Not in my name." And I think this is very important for South Africans to take courage from that and do the right thing.
And if I may add, Mahlatse, I think lots of people ask, is there hope? There's lots of hope. In the interview with Lungisa Fuzile, and I don't know if I wrote it, I probably should have, but I asked them, how do you turn this around? I mean, institutions they're being uneroded. How do you turn this around? And he said, look, it can be done. If you replace flawed characters in certain key positions, like at the NPA, like at the Public Protector, like at Treasury, and there's a public process of accountability, which means people need to go to jail, then we can do it.
Last question, gentlemen. There is all this talk of a quiet exit for President Jacob Zuma. What damage would that do for us as a country?
I think that will completely undermine the rule of law. If Zuma doesn't go to court to ultimately face the charges, I don't see a legal way for that to be done. The case is now active again, the charges against President Zuma. Sean Abrams is now considering presentations from Zuma's lawyers. He must make a legal decision based on that. He cannot make an irrational decision like Mokhtedi Mshe did. So there's no way to remove that case politically from the MPA, and there shouldn't be. The process of the law must follow its course.
And you? I mean, Pieter,
No, I
do you
agree.
think that...
I don't think it's desirable for the president that we look for a political solution to the problems that the president has. Let's look north of the border. What's happening in Harare now? There's lots of talk of a political solution to get rid of President Robert Mugabe, to send him into exile. That's the talk at the moment. We don't need that here. We want public accountability. That's the way to repair the country and to repair the confidence that we have in state and government.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time, gentlemen. That was the editor of Huffington Post, Pieter du Toit, and the editor of News 24, Adriaan Basson, joining us here on News 24, talking about their newly released book, Enemy of the People. My name is Mahlatsi Mahlase, political editor for News 24.